From the high-stakes choices of climate change policies and Canada's energy economy, to the urgent crisis of the opioid epidemic, to questions of Indigenous consultation, Western Canada is the crucible where some of the country's most difficult decisions must be made. As a result, the Globe and Mail is strengthening its coverage in the region and is launching its 20th newsletter, this one focusing on Western Canada. I'm Wendy Cox, BC editor at the Globe and Mail, and along with my colleague, Alberta Bureau Chief James Keller, each week we will curate the news you need to know about the region and its place in the issues facing Canada. This week, the official invitation from the International Olympic Committee for Calgary to bid for the 2026 Winter Olympics came with all the flattery one might expect from a hopeful suitor. Canada, IOC Vice President Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr. said, can put together an Olympics any day of the week. Calgary and the Canadian Olympic Committee are more than capable to stage the Games. They do that every winter with international competitions, Mr. Samaranch said in announcing that Calgary, Stockholm and Cortina Milan are the three cities the IOC would like to hear from by January. But news emerged Friday indicating that Stockholm may not want to participate after all. Calgarians themselves will cast ballots next month on whether they want to accept Mr. Samaranch's proposal. The question is basic. Are you for or are you against Calgary hosting the 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games? But there are many details yet to be defined, Justin Giovanetti writes this weekend. On Friday, the provincial government announced it would kick in $700 million, leaving the city and the federal governments to pick up the remaining $2.3 billion the draft plan for the bid suggests will be needed from government coffers. How that gets divvied up is unknown. City Council also hasn't announced how much weight the non-binding vote will have. It would depend on the results and the turnout, but what those thresholds are also haven't been determined. One of the carrots dangled by yes proponents is the Calgary Bid Committee's pledge for more affordable housing, available after athletes and officials have gone home. The hosting plan pledges 2,000 affordable, accessible, seniors, Indigenous and student housing units, though Vancouver's 2010 experience is a cautionary tale. What is affordable? In fact, pretty much nothing in Vancouver. Since the Games, the former Olympic Village has become one of the city's toniest neighborhoods, as real estate prices have been on a well-publicized rocket upward. Last spring, British Columbians ended 16 years of Liberal government in Victoria, largely due to anger over the price of housing. Later this month, Vancouver residents will choose a new city council, and the issue overshadowing everything else is again housing. There's a record number of candidates running, 158 for 27 positions, but none of them are running as mayor for the party that Gregor Robertson led for 8 years before deciding to step aside. This weekend, Francis Bula, who has been covering City Hall for 30 years, tries to give voters some idea of who stands for what on housing amid the bewildering array of new parties and independent candidates. Adrian Tanner also helps out with a column extolling the virtues of some independents who struggle to get their message out. Thanks for following along this week and in the weeks to come. We'd love to hear your feedback. By Wendy Cox, BC editor around the West. Trans Mountain, the National Energy Board said Friday it will hold oral sessions late next month for Indigenous communities that have expressed concern about the marine impacts of the pipeline project. In an effort to speed up the new round of hearings, the board is limiting non-Indigenous witnesses to written-only evidence and has asked interveners to keep their submissions to a narrow set of issues that weren't included in the first round of hearings in 2015. Those include matters of species at risk protection for the southern resident killer whale. The board has a deadline of February 22 to report to the federal government about how to address the gaps that prompted the Federal Court of Appeal to put the project in limbo. Trucking: the Alberta government has announced another round of changes to its trucking industry after the bus crash that killed 16 people connected with the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team. Starting next year, new drivers will be required to have 125 hours of training before making their first trip, up from just 15 hours. As well, trucking firms will need to prove they comply with safety rules before hitting the road. Alberta Transportation Minister Brian Mason unveiled the changes as he also announced that regulatory charges have been filed against the owner of a small Calgary-based firm whose semi-trailer was involved in the crash. Sukhminder Singh, owner of Adesh Dial Trucking, faces 8 provincial and federal safety violations. Cannabis. Washington state's governor says the U.S. midterm elections could make it easier for Canadians to cross the border without worrying about whether marijuana use will prevent them from traveling. Immigration experts have warned that U.S. border guards have the power to turn away or even permanently ban travelers who admit to smoking marijuana. Governor Jay Inslee, a Democrat, said during a visit to BC that the problem will be resolved over time. The U.S. government has also said people who work in the legal cannabis sector won't face problems crossing the border as long as they're not traveling for work. Indigenous rights. An Alberta First Nation has lost a case at the Supreme Court of Canada that centered on whether the federal government needs to consult Indigenous people when it drafts laws that affect treaty rights. The Miccosukee First Nation went to court after the federal Conservative government of the day introduced 2 omnibus budget bills that dramatically altered Canada's environmental laws. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the courts do not have the jurisdiction to make decisions about bills that are still being developed and debated by Parliament. Pipeline explosion. A fiery pipeline explosion in central British Columbia has caused natural gas shortages across the province and as far away as Oregon. The pipeline ruptured on Tuesday in the Olheitli Nation community near Prince George, sparking a massive fire and forcing the temporary evacuation of about 100 people. FortisBC and providers in Washington and Oregon have asked customers to conserve natural gas, though service has been slowly restored. Meanwhile, the RCMP says they don't believe the pipeline explosion was suspicious. United Conservative Party. A nomination candidate for Alberta's United Conservative Party has been shown the door after posing with members of the Soldiers of Odin, a group with roots in Europe's neo-Nazi movement. Lance Coulter said he was aware of who they were and was okay with it, because he believes in free speech and felt obliged to respond to their polite conversation. The party, in turn, said he has embarrassed the UCP and its members and that a polite racist is still a racist. Mr. Coulter has been defiant, suggesting in a Facebook post that he may try to appeal. Local elections. A Vancouver area real estate and immigration lawyer who was accused of professional misconduct by British Columbia's Law Society is running for a city council seat in Richmond, BC in April 2016. Richmond lawyer Hong Guo reported to the Law Society that $7.5 million she was holding in trust for clients was missing. She insisted the client's money was stolen by 2 of her employees who then fled to China. Opinion. Gary Mason on environmental politics. Fighting climate measures such as the carbon tax makes good politics at the moment, even as the smartest people in the world, including Nobel laureate and climate researcher William Nordhaus, is saying the most efficient remedy for shrinking greenhouse gas emissions is a worldwide carbon tax. Don't tell that to Mr. Kinney. He apparently knows better. Mark Cameron and David McLaughlin on carbon pricing. The growing opposition in provinces toward carbon pricing cannot be ignored by Ottawa. Instead of trying to patch up a patchwork system, it should see this as a new opportunity and assert itself in the national interest. Ed Broadbent and Hugh Segal on electoral reform. The evidence of the past few months is clear. Given the realities of Canadian voting trends, converting our provincial and federal electoral systems to proportional ones needs to be an immediate priority.